I wiped down the last table at Joe's Cafe, glancing at the clock that ticked steadily towards my freedom for the night. The diner's neon sign buzzed in the evening calm, a beacon for the occasional late-night wanderer looking for a cup of joe or a piece of pie. My apron, splattered with today's special, felt heavier with each passing minute. My shift was finally ending, and the real work, the kind that fueled my dreams, was about to begin. "Mama, I'm heading out to the Rusty Nail. They asked me to do a couple of sets tonight," I called, my voice echoing slightly in the now empty cafe. From the back, amidst the clatter of dishes, Mom's voice came, tired yet always supportive. "Sing like the angels, Elena. Make 'em listen." Inside the Rusty Nail, the atmosphere was a stark contrast to the biting cold outside. The warmth of dim lights and the murmur of scattered conversations welcomed me like an old friend. I headed straight to the tiny stage that was more an afterthought than a feature. The owner, a burly man with a smile that could light up the room, gave me a nod. "Got a good crowd tonight, Luna. Some big shot producers amongst 'em. Make it count." Luna. The name still felt new, but Mr. Carter, the producer who'd taken a chance on me a few days back, insisted it was sonorous and memorable. He was in the crowd tonight, his sharp eyes missing nothing. The set started off with some of my favorites, the notes of each song weaving through the smoky air, creating a tapestry of sound that seemed to hold the room in a trance. I poured every ounce of my soul into the lyrics, each word a testament to the years of dreaming and striving. Halfway through a particularly heartfelt ballad, I caught Mr. Carter's eye. He was nodding slightly, the ghost of a smile playing on his lips. After my set, I made my way to his table, my heart pounding not from the singing but from what this conversation could mean. "Elena, you were phenomenal," Mr. Carter said, his voice smooth like aged whiskey. "That voice of yours needs bigger stages." I blushed, tucking a loose strand of hair behind my ear. "Thank you, Mr. Carter. I'm just glad to have the gigs." He slid a card across the table. "I want you to join a course at my vocal school. Sharpen those raw edges. And then, who knows? Maybe open for some big names?" As I walked home later, under the speckled canvas of the night sky, every step felt lighter. I was going to work harder, shine brighter. Mr. Carter believed in Luna, but more importantly, I believed in myself. Ever since Mr. Carter roped me into this whirlwind of vocal drills and endless rehearsals, my life's been nothing short of a mad dash from one microphone to the next. The vocal school was tougher than anything I'd ever faced. Every day was a grind, but every note I belted out made me feel like I was inching closer to something big, something life-changing. "Elena, you're flat on the high C. Again. Focus," barked Mr. Jennings, the vocal coach who had a way of making you feel like you were back in grade school. "Sorry, I got it this time. Just, give me a sec," I replied, wiping the sweat from my brow and squaring my shoulders. "Take 5, everyone. But not you, Luna. Let's get this right," he commanded, not even looking up from his clipboard. As everyone else scattered toward the break room, I took a deep breath and prepared myself for another go. Mr. Jennings played the piano keys, giving me the cue. Hold it, there. That's it, Luna. Why can't you hit it like that every time?" he said, a rare smile breaking through his usually stern demeanor. "Just needed to warm up, I guess," I shot back with a grin, feeling a mix of relief and pride swelling inside me. Back in the break room, a couple of other students were huddled around a table, their eyes glued to their phones. "That was some note you hit there, Luna. Bet you could shatter glass with that," joked Alex, a fellow student with a knack for making everyone laugh. "Yeah, well, I'd settle for shattering expectations," I quipped, grabbing a water bottle from the fridge. The conversation turned to the upcoming showcase, where we were all supposed to demonstrate what we'd learned. It was a big deal, with scouts and agents in the audience. Just thinking about it made my stomach do flips. "You ready for the showcase, Luna? Heard some big names might be dropping by," said Alex, his tone turning serious. "Ready as I'll ever be. Just gotta keep my cool and show 'em what I'm made of," I replied, trying to sound more confident than I felt. The day of the showcase arrived faster than a freight train. Backstage, the air was thick with nerves and hairspray. Stepping out onto the stage, the lights blinded me for a moment. I could see shadows of people out in the audience, some shifting in their seats, others silent in anticipation. The music started, and for a moment, everything else faded away. It was just me and the song. I poured every ounce of emotion I had into the lyrics, letting the melody lift me higher and higher until the final note hung in the air like a promise. The applause that followed was deafening. I couldn't help but smile, basking in the sound of it all. As I walked off the stage, Mr. Carter was waiting in the wings, his usual stern expression replaced with something softer, something akin to pride. As I changed back into my regular clothes and prepared to leave, my phone buzzed with a text from Mom. "Heard your showcase went great. So proud of you. Love you." Smiling, I typed back, "Thanks, Mom. Couldn't have gotten here without you. Love you more." Walking out into the night, the air felt different, lighter somehow, as if the evening itself was whispering of bigger stages and brighter lights just on the horizon. Life on the stage was like nothing else, and I was finally living it, big time. Mr. Carter had me opening for names that once felt like they belonged in a different universe. Each concert, each crowd was bigger, louder, more thrilling than the last. Then, at a charity gig decked out with chandeliers and swanky suits, I met David. He was one of those patrons, the kind you know have more money than they know what to do with, but he was different. He actually listened, really listened, when I sang. After my set, we got to talking and something just clicked. "Hey, you really stole the show tonight," he said, his smile easy, his eyes kind. "Thanks, I guess I just tried to give it my all," I replied, trying to sound more casual than I felt. We started seeing each other, and it wasn't long before it turned into something real, something deep. On our 1-year anniversary, he took me to this little secluded spot overlooking the city, got down on one knee, and popped the question. My heart nearly burst out of my chest. "Yes. Of course, yes." I blurted out before he even finished asking. It was like a fairy tale, at least until the day he decided it was time I met his parents. The nerves I felt performing in front of thousands didn't come close to the anxiety of meeting David's mother. The way she looked me up and down when David introduced me, it was clear she had already formed her opinion before even a hello. "So, Elena, David tells me you're a singer. At restaurants, is it?" Her voice dripped with something colder than disdain. "Yes, Mrs. Westwood. I perform at various venues," I responded, trying to keep my voice steady. David squeezed my hand under the table, a silent plea for me to stay cool. "Well, I suppose we all do what we can with what we're given," she sighed, as if the weight of the world was on her shoulders just thinking about my upbringing. David's father, Mr. Westwood, was a stark contrast. He arrived a few days later from a business trip, and right away, he was warm and engaging. "Elena has quite the voice, Dad. She's opened for some pretty big names." David beamed, proud as could be. "That's fantastic. Music's a tough field. Takes a lot of grit," Mr. Westwood replied, his nod filled with a respect that felt like a balm to the burn Mrs. Westwood had left. But the relief was short-lived. Mrs. Westwood's comments grew sharper, more frequent. "One must wonder how a young lady gets so far in such an industry. Surely not by keeping her virtue intact," she once remarked during a dinner, her words slicing through the air like a knife. I felt my face go hot, my hands clench into fists under the table. "Mr. Carter has been nothing but a mentor to me, Mrs. Westwood." "Oh, come now, dear. We all know how these things work. A girl without a father figure is often looking for one, isn't she?" She chuckled, as if it was just a bit of harmless fun. Her refusal to see me as worthy gnawed at me, her words echoing in my head long after they were spoken. But David stood by me, his love unwavering. "Don't listen to her, Elena. You're amazing, and that's all that matters." I wanted to believe him. I needed to believe him. But as we started planning our wedding, Mrs. Westwood's shadow loomed large, making me wonder if I'd ever really be part of their family. The morning of my wedding, I woke up with a belly full of butterflies and a heart overflowing with love. David and I had poured our souls into every detail of the wedding. It was the day we had both been dreaming of. The venue was draped in delicate whites and soft pinks, every petal and candle placed with care. It was perfect, just like I'd always imagined. As I slipped into my dress, a stunning number that made me feel like a star in one of those fancy romance flicks, I couldn't help but catch my mom's teary-eyed smile in the mirror. The ceremony started with a swell of music, and as I walked down the aisle, all eyes on me, I saw David at the altar, looking like he'd won the lottery. My nerves settled, replaced by a fierce joy. This was it. This was our moment. As we stood before the priest, hand in hand, the traditional question came. If anyone has any reason why these two should not be married, speak now or forever hold your peace. The silence that followed was expected. What wasn't expected was the sharp click of a heel and a voice that cut through the quiet like a knife. I have something to say. It was Mrs. Westwood, standing up in her finery, her face set in a mask of disapproval. Murmurs swirled through the gathered crowd as she started her tirade. This girl, Elena, is nothing but an uneducated dropout who grew up without a father. Her mother conceived her with the first man she met. Do we even know his name? The room went dead quiet, every word from her lips a slap to my face. I felt David's grip tighten around my hands, his jaw clenched. She barely scraped through school, and sings at night in eateries, in front of all sorts of men. This is not the kind of woman fit for our family, Mrs. Westwood declared, her voice ringing in the hall. Before I could shrink away, David stepped forward, his voice firm and loud. Mom, stop. I love Elena. Her past doesn't matter to me. I know her heart, her strength, and her character. That's the woman I chose to marry. His words seemed to silence the room even further, if that was possible. Mrs. Westwood looked stunned, her mouth snapping shut as she realized her son was not on her side this time. The priest cleared his throat. Shall we continue? With a nod from us both, the ceremony went on, but the poison of her words lingered, making my hands tremble and my heart race. It wasn't until the music started for our first dance that I felt a shift. David pulled me close, his hand warm on my back. Forget everyone else. It's just you and me now, he murmured as we swayed to the music. The first dance with David was like a dream. As we glided across the floor, his promises still echoing in my heart, I almost believed that the worst was over. As the last note of our song faded, Mrs. Westwood, flushed from too much champagne, stumbled to the center of the room, grabbing a microphone from the DJ. Such a lovely tradition, the father-daughter dance. Pity we won't see one tonight, eh? She slurred, her voice dripping with mockery. A hush fell over the room. I felt every eye on me, the weight of their stares like a blanket of ice. David's grip tightened on my hand, his whisper urgent. Ignore her, Elena, please. Before I could even muster a response, the side door creaked open, and a man, disheveled and dirty, staggered into the spotlight. My heart sank as Mrs. Westwood's cruel laughter cut through the stunned silence. Look here, perhaps this is Elena's father ready for their dance, she jeered. The room erupted in confused murmurs, some gasps, others hushed whispers. I felt my cheeks burn, my eyes stinging with unshed tears. I covered my face, unable to bear the spectacle. Suddenly, the sharp clack of heels announced my mother's arrival on the stage. Her voice, usually so gentle, was steel as she confronted Mrs. Westwood. This isn't a joke, Diane. You've gone too far. Apologize to my daughter, now. Mom demanded, her presence commanding silence. Mrs. Westwood, swaying slightly, just scoffed, her sneer evident even through her slurred words. Oh, come off it, it's just a bit of fun. Lighten up. That's when Mr. Westwood, who had been silent until now, stepped forward, his face dark with anger. Diane, enough. What are you thinking? He turned to the audience, his voice carrying a mix of embarrassment and authority. This man is an actor, hired by my wife as a distasteful joke. I apologize to everyone here, especially to Elena and her family. He then turned sharply to his wife. You need to leave, now. With a huff, Mrs. Westwood tossed the microphone down and stormed out, her exit as dramatic as her antics. As the door slammed behind her, the tension seemed to deflate slightly, and Mom came over to me, pulling me into a tight embrace. "It's okay, baby. Let's not let her ruin your day," she whispered, smoothing back my hair as I fought to regain my composure. "You all right to keep going?" David asked, his eyes searching mine for any sign of retreat. I nodded, wiping my eyes. "Yeah, let's finish this. For us." The rest of the evening passed in a blur of dances, toasts, and laughter, so much so that by the end of the night, I had almost forgotten the cruel stunt Mrs. Westwood had pulled. Almost, but not quite. Every now and then, the memory would resurface, a sharp stab reminding me that despite the beautiful vows and the joyous celebration, a shadow lingered over our new beginning. Ever since the wedding, Mrs. Westwood had been quieter, but a tiger doesn't change its stripes overnight. When she called me about a charity event she was organizing, her voice had that same old chill. "Elena, you should come to the charity concert next weekend. There will be some truly talented singers there. It might be educational for you," she said, her words dripping with that familiar condescension. I bit my tongue to keep from snapping back. "Sounds lovely, Diane. Who's performing?" She hesitated, a scoff hidden just beneath her breath. "Oh, various artists. I can't quite remember all their names." Typical Diane, setting the stage to belittle me. But I played along. "Well, I'd love to attend. Thanks for the invitation." That very night, Mr. Carter, my producer, called with some interesting news. "Luna, you're set to perform at a charity event next Saturday. It's a big gig, lots of high rollers." I paused, a slow grin spreading across my face as I connected the dots. This wouldn't happen to be the Westwood charity concert, would it? "That's the one. How'd you guess?" Mr. Carter chuckled on the other end. "Just a lucky guess," I replied, my mind already ticking. "Carter, let's keep it under wraps that Luna is actually Elena Westwood, okay? I want it to be a surprise." He laughed, clearly amused by the idea. "You got it, Luna. They'll only see your stage name." The night of the concert, the venue was buzzing with the city's elite, all finely dressed and ready to be entertained. Mrs. Westwood was fluttering around like a peacock, greeting donors and flashing her insincere smiles. As I arrived, hidden behind the stage, I could hear her addressing the crowd. "Thank you all for coming tonight. Your generosity supports a great cause. And now, please welcome the sensational Luna." The crowd clapped politely, some craning their necks to see the rising star Mrs. Westwood had boasted about. I took a deep breath and stepped into the spotlight. The hush that fell was delicious. As the first few notes of the song filled the air, I began to sing, pouring every ounce of my passion into the words. From the corner of my eye, I saw Mrs. Westwood's rigid posture falter. She fumbled with her phone, probably texting Mr. Carter in a panic. When the song ended, the applause was thunderous. I took my bow, my heart soaring as the applause washed over me. It wasn't just a performance, it was a victory. Stepping off stage, I caught snippets of conversations, praises mingled with surprise. "Wasn't that Elena Westwood? Diane's daughter-in-law?" "Yes, the very one. Who would have thought?" Mrs. Westwood cornered me backstage, her face a mask of fury barely contained. "What is this stunt? You embarrassed me in front of all my guests." I met her glare with a calm I didn't feel. "Diane, I was invited to sing. I just did my job. You said yourself you wanted to hear from talented singers." Her lips thinned into a line, and for a moment, I thought she might cause another scene. But she turned on her heel and stormed off instead. After my performance, David and I stood hand in hand, soaking in the success of the evening. My heart was still racing from the thrill of it all, but that high crashed down when Mrs. Westwood took the stage again. Her face twisted with disdain, she grabbed the microphone from the MC. "While the voice may be delightful, let's not forget who we're applauding," she sneered, her voice echoing through the hall. "This famous singer, ladies and gentlemen, is nothing but a bastard born of unknowns, and it's my duty to remind her fans of her true origins." The crowd murmured, the atmosphere thickening with tension. I felt my face drain of color, anger seething within me. Before I could react, my mom stepped onto the stage, elegant and composed, flanked by a man I'd never seen, a bit older than David. "Enough, Diane." Mom's voice was calm, but carried an undeniable edge. "I've had enough of your humiliations toward me and my daughter. It's time some truths came to light." She paused, giving the man next to her a nod. He stepped forward, an envelope in hand. "After Elena's wedding, I hired a detective. We discovered some intriguing facts about Diane here." Mom continued, her eyes locked on Mrs. Westwood, who paled under the scrutiny. "Years ago, Diane got pregnant by her boyfriend, who promptly abandoned her. Alone and desperate, she met her future husband online. Pretending to want a long correspondence, she actually planned to give up her baby at birth." The murmurs grew louder, the guests shifting uncomfortably as they absorbed the gravity of Mom's words. "But fate intervened," Mom said. "She kept the baby and met her husband, never revealing her past." The man beside Mom stepped forward, his voice steady but filled with emotion. "I am that baby. Diane is my mother, abandoned me, and I was raised by foster parents. All my life, I've dreamed of meeting her, my biological mother." He held up the envelope. "This DNA test confirms everything. Diane, you are my mother, and David is my brother." The hall erupted into whispers and gasps. Mrs. Westwood's face crumpled, her usual poise crumbling as the reality of her deceit was laid bare for all to see. Mr. Westwood, who had been standing off to the side, his expression unreadable, finally spoke, his voice booming over the noise. "I can't believe this, Diane. To think you've lied about something so fundamental. I need time to think about all of this." Mr. Westwood turned and left the hall, his shoulders heavy. The crowd's buzzing grew louder, filled with indignation and shock at the duplicity of Mrs. Westwood. Amidst the chaos, she fled the room, her departure as dramatic as her life had been deceptive. Mr. Carter, who had been watching from the sidelines, approached us, a supportive smile on his face. "Elena, why don't you give us one more song? One about honesty and love, perhaps?" Nodding, I took the stage again. The opening notes of the song filled the room, a melody about truth and the courage it takes to face it. As I sang, the earlier tension dissipated, replaced by a collective catharsis. The applause at the end was overwhelming, not just for the performance, but for the truth. As it rang out, I saw my mom wiping away tears of pride. After the fiasco that blew up at the charity event, things changed drastically for everyone involved. Mrs. Westwood, once the queen bee of her social circles, found herself isolated after the divorce. Mr. Westwood couldn't see past the deception, and he ended their marriage, leaving her with nothing but a modest allowance. I heard through the grapevine that her former friends turned their backs, snubbing her from gatherings and charity events that she once dominated. It's like she vanished from the social scene entirely. Meanwhile, my career took off in ways I never imagined. The scandal put the spotlight on me, and not just as a singer. People were touched by the story, by the struggle and the strength it took to face down such public betrayal. Mr. Carter called me about starting my first album. "Luna, it's time to channel all this into your music. Are you ready to start on your album?" he said over the phone, his voice brimming with excitement. "You bet I am, Carter. Let's show them what I'm made of," I replied, feeling the fire of anticipation lighting up inside me. In the middle of all this, David and his newfound brother, Michael, grew close. It was a silver lining in a very dark cloud. They met up often, finding comfort and understanding in their shared, if complicated, family dynamics. One day, I sat down with my mom, the woman who stood by me through every high and every low. We were in her cozy kitchen, the smell of fresh coffee in the air. "Mom, I don't know how to ever thank you enough. You've been my rock," I started, my voice thick with emotion. "Honey, you don't need to thank me. I did what any mother would do. Plus, seeing you handle everything with such grace, that's all the thanks I need," she said, her eyes misty as she sipped her coffee. As I got deeper into the process of creating my album, each song felt like a piece of my journey, a melody of my trials and triumphs. David was my constant supporter, and having Michael around brought a new dimension to our lives. It was strange how life worked out, but I was grateful for where we all ended up.